And this is a lesson that I learned the hard way. Several years ago, one of our sows had piglets, and as castration day approached, I reached out to my dad to try to connect up and synchronize our schedules so that he could come down and help me do it. And we were having some difficulty doing that, and it was taking a little longer than I would have liked. And I happened to mention it at dinner one evening as I was talking with Bonnie and Brian J. And Brian J looked at me and he said, "But Dad, why are you waiting for Grandpa? You have a teenage son that'd be willing to help you." This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 123 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. Now, today's main topic is going to be a continuation of our series about raising kids on the homestead. Today, we're going to be talking about lessons in responsibility. But before we get there, it's getting busy here on the homestead, everyone. Spring has finally sprung here in beautiful upstate New York. And so there's a lot of ground I want to cover on today's homestead happening. So let's pop on over there. The first thing I want to share with you on today's homestead happenings is the fact that my little seedlings are popping up out of the soil blocks and the seed trays that I started them in. My brassicas are looking awesome. My tomatoes have come up pretty well. My peppers, not so much. The peppers are a little slow to get started this year. And so I'm not sure if I did something wrong, if the seed was bad, if I planted it too deep. Fingers crossed that the peppers are going to come up. Peppers sometimes can be a little finicky and take a little longer to germinate. So I'm just trying to just be patient, but patience is not one of the traits that I exhibit very, very often. And so we'll see what we get, but very excited to see those things popping up out of the soil blocks. My onions are looking great. I've actually started taking those out of the seed starting system here indoors and putting them out on the porch during the day, bringing them back in the evenings, but they can handle the cool weather pretty well. And so I just like getting them out of the seed starting system as quickly as I can, because the tray that I start them in is rather large, takes up a lot of room. And so the sooner I can get them out of there, the more room I have to start other things. In fact, today I started an entire tray of flowers. I started nasturtiums, sunflowers. I don't even remember what all I started in there, but it's an entire tray of flowers. So very excited about that. And then I also started a tray that's a mixture of some kohlrabi, some kale, and some eggplant. Now, technically speaking, I'm a little late to start eggplant indoors, but I've actually direct sown eggplant before and had success. I've also direct sown kohlrabi and kale and had success as well. So we'll see what happens. It's all an experiment, right? Anyhow, very excited about what's going on in the seed starting system, except for the peppers. Fingers crossed, those are going to start popping, and then I'll feel a little bit better about that. But the rest of the stuff is starting to take off, and that's very, very exciting. An update on the pigs. 4 piglets left, which is very, very unfortunate, very frustrating. But any day now, bet swine should farrow. And I also got some great news that the 2 pigs that I have on loan to Beardsley Zoo are due to farrow this week. So hopefully that's going to make up for the losses that I experienced over the last couple of weeks. And hopefully between now and next year, I can get some things figured out, maybe get a little bit of a better setup in place, And hopefully next year we'll be in a little better space. Some more exciting news. My baby chicks arrived on Friday. That's always an exciting time, getting the phone call from the post office that the chicks are here. It's always fun for me to drive home from the post office and hear the little peep, 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 peep of the baby chicks in the box. And then we get them in the brooder, and they're doing very well. I have lost 2 chicks, which is unfortunate, but sometimes that happens. The stress of shipping, just sometimes they cannot put up with it. And so we lose a couple. Hopefully we won't lose much more than that. Usually hatcheries will refund your money if the birds die within 48 hours of arriving. And so I just keep track of it, and I'll reach out to the hatchery tomorrow and they'll probably just refund me the money. In the past, when I've experienced large levels of loss, they've actually reshipped an entire shipment of chicks to me, but they won't reship 2 chicks. And I wouldn't expect them to. And so I'll just contact them on Monday. The 48 hours will have passed and they will usually provide you with a refund. They're really, really good about that. But it is very exciting to have them here. And we do have our meat birds due to ship either this week or next week. Those were the 2 hatch dates that I had requested. So I'm waiting for notification from the hatchery that I deal with for my meat birds. And those should be arriving either this week or next week. I have the brooder all set up. Now, if you follow us on social media, you will have seen I posted pictures of the brooder set back up in the garage. I've tried to avoid putting the chicks in the garage. It's been so much nicer putting them in the mobile coop. But the number of birds that we have coming this year is such that I just felt like trying to put them and the standard breeds in that mobile coop was too much of an ask. And so I have set the brooder up again in the garage. The meat birds is a shorter proposition, a shorter amount of time in the garage. I just have to remind myself not to be stingy with the wood chips. The biggest problem with the meat birds in the garage is if you don't keep up with the wood chips, they really start stinking, especially there towards the end where they're not quite feathered out enough to go outside, but they're really starting to eat. And when they start eating, they start pooping. And let me tell you something, folks, that poop is some of the nastiest smelling stuff that I have ever experienced. So the best way to keep on top of that is to not be stingy with the wood chips. Just got to remind myself of that, and we should be okay. Hopefully next year, I will have my other trailer set up as a mobile brooder, and then we won't be doing this again. But it is what it is. It kind of snuck up on me in part, and part of it was that I didn't really want to pay the money that it was going to take for the lumber to build that mobile brooder, so to speak, out of that one trailer that I have. So hopefully next year we'll have that in place. This week, I also sent the latest copy of our newsletter out. So if you are interested in receiving that, if you head on over to the website, thehomesteadjourney.net, you can sign up for the newsletter there. And I also released the latest Just the Basics printable. This one was on gardening. Very, very excited about it. It was very difficult when you start really diving into a getting started with gardening guide. Say that 5 times fast. You really realize the depth and breadth of the topic of gardening. So I didn't want to go too deep. I didn't want to go too wide, but I wanted to give people a great starting point. And I really, and maybe this is me tooting my own horn, but I really do think this guide is going to be very, very helpful to people who are just getting started with gardening. So if that describes you and you have not signed up for the Just the Basics series, head on over to the website, thehomesteadjourney.net/basics, and you'll be able to get signed up for all of the printables that I've released up to this point, as well as upcoming ones. And tonight, actually, I started working on the next in the series, which is about raising meat chickens. So if that's something that is of interest to you, definitely get signed up. And as soon as I have that completed, ready to rock and roll, I'll email you and let you know, and you'll be able to download it. And hopefully these printables are very, very helpful to you. If there are ways that I can make them more helpful, please let me know that. If there's a topic that I haven't covered yet that you would like me to cover, as always, you can reach out to me. Brian@thehomesteadjourney.net is my email address, and I will get it into the queue if it's not already there. There are some exciting things happening over on the Supporting Listeners Discord channel. One of the members just posted yesterday that she picked up her goats. Very, very cute. But Bonnie's still not interested in getting goats. So I don't know what it's going to take. But anyhow, if you are interested in being a part of that, Bonnie has some information to share.
If you enjoy this podcast and are interested in supporting it, you can do so by becoming a member of the Supporting Listeners program. For as little as $3 a month, you can not only support this show, but gain access to a private members-only community on Discord. There are also 2 additional tiers, one at $5 a month and one at $10 a month, each with additional benefits and perks. So head on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/support for more information and to get signed up today.
All right, folks, with all of that said, let's head on over to this week's Charting the Course. Before we jump into this week's topic of raising kids on the homestead and lessons in responsibility, I did want to quickly mention that I have received a lot of positive feedback about last week's episode. I was really pleasantly surprised about that and the fact that I am seeing downloads. I really wasn't quite sure when I put that episode out if people would shy away from it. I really was worried that that cultural norm of ours, at least here in the United States, to shy away from the topic of death would mean that many people would avoid that episode. But it seems like it's doing well, and I've received great feedback on it. People who have reached out to me and thanked me for that episode. And so I am very, very happy that I did it, even though it was a very difficult topic to cover. This week's topic, though, is something a lot more positive on one hand, but it might be a little bit on the sticky subject spectrum. And the reason being is that this really does speak to parenting methodologies a little bit and maybe parenting philosophy. And so if my approach is different than your approach with kids, please take what I have to say with a grain of salt. We have certainly in this area of providing Brian J. with opportunities to develop responsibility, admittedly, we have erred many times. There have been times when we've given him too much responsibility, but many times we really have not given him enough responsibility. And there have also been times when I have missed out on opportunities to involve him in homesteading related activities because I didn't want to bother him, or, in a moment of honesty here, I did not want to be bothered. And I know that sounds very, very selfish, but there are some times when you're involved in a task and you're wanting to get it done and you bring your kids into that task, it can make that task last much longer. And I know that sounds selfish. That may sound like horrible parenting, but it's just the reality of the fact, folks. I saw on one of the groups that I'm a part of this week, somebody who was asking the question of, how do you get things done when you have a toddler and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old? And it's tough. It is very, very tough when you have kids and you try to involve them in homesteading related projects, that it doesn't take things off the rails. And you end up being frustrated with them and them frustrated with you. And that for me has been a growing edge. in part because I do overschedule myself. I spread myself far too thin. And so when I have a window of opportunity to get a project done, I have, generally speaking, an idea of what I want to devote to it. Usually I'm way wrong. As I've shared with you before, usually my projects take far longer and cost me far more money than what I anticipated. But then when you try to bring a kid into that sphere, it can many times take that project and make it last much longer. And I feel like at times I have shortchanged myself and I have shortchanged Brian J because I have failed to involve him in certain projects solely because I was being selfish. And I was like, I want to get this done. I don't want any distractions. And that's just not a good thing. It is not a good thing at all. And so all of that to say, there have been many times, in fact, probably more times, I have failed more times than I have been successful in this area. But these are some of the things that I have learned the hard way. The first thing is that you really should start giving kids responsibility on your homestead as early as you possibly can. Obviously, you want to make sure that the responsibility is appropriate for their age and their maturity level. You're not going to ask a 5-year-old to drive the tractor. At least you probably shouldn't. Now, my dad actually, when he was 5 years old, and this is no lie, my dad actually did figure out how to unhook the wagon, start the tractor, and drive it. I don't encourage that. And my grandparents certainly were not encouraging that either. So make sure that the responsibility, the area of responsibility is appropriate for your child's age and maturity level, but start giving your kids responsibilities on the homestead as early as you possibly can, whether it's going into the coop and simply gathering the eggs. That's something that probably a 5-year-old can do. 6-year-old, I don't know. You know your child better than I know your child. But gathering eggs is something that's not hard, especially if you're going with them to do it. So as soon as you can, involve them, give them areas of responsibility, but again, make sure that it's appropriate for their age and maturity level. But along with that age and maturity level, don't assume that your kids can't do certain things. And I think sometimes that's where we have made mistakes. And Bonnie in particular sometimes has a tendency, and I don't know if it's a mama bear, daddy bear kind of a thing, but sometimes she's had a tendency to try to say, well, maybe we shouldn't do that with him. And I've had a tendency to maybe push him a little. And so maybe we find a little bit of a balance there. I don't know. But don't hold back as far as what your kids are capable of doing. They, generally speaking, I think, are capable of doing much more than what we think they can. But be smart about it. You know your child better than I know your child. And I'm certainly not going to sit here and say, okay, at the age of 6, they should be gathering eggs. At the age of 8, they should be butchering chickens. No, I don't know what your child can handle emotionally, physically, mentally. I don't know. But as soon as you can, involve them in things. Make sure it's appropriate for their age and maturity level, but also make sure that they are pushed a little bit. Brian J, I think, was 13 or 14 when we got our tractor. And it wasn't much after that I had him driving that down the road to go get wood chips. Now, I was following him in the truck, and I made sure that he was safe, that he was wearing the seatbelt, that we had the ROPS up, that he knew how to use the turn signals. He knew how to look for traffic and all of those kinds of things. But he was 13, 14 years old, and he was driving the tractor down, and he was operating the loader, dumping the wood chips in the back of the truck, and then driving it back home. He was able to handle that. He had a maturity. Now, maybe not every kid can do that. Maybe some kids can do it sooner. You know your child much better than I do. But that certainly is a benefit of growing up on the homestead, is that they have the opportunity maybe to drive the farm truck across the field or down the driveway. I'm not saying you need to take them at 13 or 14 years of age out onto the highway. Okay. But maybe they drive the farm truck down the lane or across the field, or they drive the tractor. Whatever it is, be sensible. But that's part of the fun and the joy of growing up on a homestead, that they have some experiences like that that maybe other kids don't have. As your kids get older, certainly the level of responsibility is going to increase. And I really think that it's very, very important that we hold our kids accountable for whatever chores it is that they're assigned. Now, I think that there are some chores that kids should be assigned simply as a matter of being citizens of the home. I think that is true whether a kid is being raised on a homestead or not being raised on a homestead. There are certain levels of areas of responsibility that kids should embrace the older that they get, whether it's keeping their room clean, whether it's washing the dishes, loading the dishwasher, maybe doing their own laundry, learning how to iron their clothes, whatever it is. I think kids need to start understanding those life skills, because eventually they're going to hopefully be living out on their own. They're not going to be living with mom and dad the rest of their lives. And so part of that is just simply learning life skills. But on the homestead, it goes a little bit beyond that. And so maybe they have areas of responsibility when it comes to animals. For us, Brian J took an interest in the chickens. And so for a very, very long time, he was the one that fed the chickens. He watered the chickens. He gathered the eggs. He was responsible for taking care of the chickens. Now, over the last couple of years, he's stepped away from that a little bit. Maybe we've been a little too lax in that area, but as he's gotten older and gotten involved in other things like working and clubs and other activities after school, we've taken on some of that responsibility from him. I'm not sure that's been the best decision that we could have made, but that certainly has been what we've done. But before that, we really did hold him accountable. Make sure that the chickens are fed, make sure that they're watered, make sure that the eggs are gathered. And if he wasn't doing those kinds of things, and there were consequences to his actions. He helped me every year pick out what breeds of chickens that we were going to raise that year. He showed them at the fair. And so in my opinion, he had some skin in the game. So he had a certain level of responsibility to make sure that those animals that he had asked for were taken care of. Along with that, I've also tried to make sure that he was involved in the stinky, less fun areas, as well as the less stinky and more fun areas. And what I mean by that is when it comes time to clean out the coop, it's not just dad out there shoveling out the coop. These are your chickens, and part of your area of responsibility and making sure that they're taken care of is you help me clean out the coop. You help me put down fresh shavings. That's all part and parcel of that. Now, as I've shared with you before, when it comes to butchering day, I don't force them to take part because I feel like emotionally that's a bit of an ask for him. But as far as the other areas of it, yes, his responsibility is the chickens. That involves the cute little fluffy butt stage. That involves taking care of them as adults. And that involves cleaning out the poop once or twice a year because we use the deep litter method. And so particularly if your children are asking for an animal, or they're asking for a garden plot, or they're asking to be involved in a particular activity, then I think it is important for us to hold them accountable to follow through on those things. If they ask for the animal, then they need to take care of that animal. If they ask for a fruit tree, then they should be involved in taking care of that fruit tree. If they ask for a grapevine, when it comes time to prune the grapevine, they should be involved in the process of pruning the grapevine. All of that is part of holding them accountable for that area that they have wanted to be involved in. But I also think that while we need to hold them accountable, we also need to, within reason, let them fail. Now, when I say within reason, I don't mean that we put them in a space where they're unsafe or that animals are going to be harmed. So we wouldn't want to say, well, let them fail and the chickens that they wanted starve or go without water. No, 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 no. Hear me out on this. That's not what I'm saying at all. But on the other hand, if they ask for a garden plot and you help them plant an area of the garden, then make sure that they're responsible for tending to that, which means that that garden spot needs to be weeded, that garden spot needs to be watered. That's their responsibility. And if they don't weed and if they don't water, a few plants die. Nobody gets hurt, right? No animals get harmed, but they can see cause and effect with regards to their actions or lack thereof. So I think sometimes it's important for us as a means of teaching them responsibility to allow them to fail. We want them to fail safely, but we also want to allow them at times to learn, because sometimes failure, it's a great teacher. But when they do fail, we also need to be careful, and this is a growing edge for me, that we don't get upset with them and mad at them. We need to use it as a teaching moment, but understand that we sometimes fail too. When we're starting out with whatever, maybe you're brand new to chickens, you're going to fail. There are times when you're going to have dead stock because you screwed up. There are times when you're going to have plants die because you screwed up. There are times when the wheel's going to fall off the wheelbarrow because you didn't tighten the bolt properly because you screwed up. And your kids are going to do the same thing. And that sometimes is a very, very difficult, it's a fine line there between allowing your kids an opportunity to learn from failure and not screaming at them and hollering at them and berating them because they screwed up again. There are certain things that you're going to be interested in, certain animals that you're going to want to get. And I think we need to be very, very careful that we don't make them do our chores. An example of that are the pigs. I got the pigs because I like the pigs. Brian J will help me periodically with the pigs, but the pigs aren't his jam, and I know that. Now, if I'm in a bind and I need somebody to feed the pigs, I'll ask him to feed the pigs, but I don't make him feed the pigs every day. He didn't ask for the pigs. And so it's my responsibility to make sure that those pigs are fed and taken care of, not his. So we need to be careful that we aren't making our kids do our chores. If that makes any sense. I think if we're not careful and we do that, we act like they're our free labor. That can very quickly end up being something very resentful. So there's a fine line there between them being citizens of the house and having certain responsibilities and us forcing them to do things that they have no interest, no desire to be a part of. It's a fine line there, but don't go whole hog into a project and then be like, so-and-so, you're going to take care of this. And then, especially if they're teenagers, and then not expect them to be frustrated and push back on it. Don't think it's going to end up well. But if you do get involved in something new, invite them to be a part of it. And this is a lesson that I learned the hard way. Several years ago, one of our sows had piglets, and as castration day approached, I reached out to my dad to try to connect up and synchronize our schedules so that he could come down and help me do it. And we were having some difficulty doing that, and it was taking a little longer than I would have liked. And I happened to mention it at dinner one evening as I was talking with Bonnie and Brian J. And Brian J looked at me and he said, "But Dad, why are you waiting for Grandpa? You have a teenage son that'd be willing to help you." And folks, it was like he punched me in the gut. Here it was, I had the opportunity to invite my son to take part in this, which is the worst job on the farm by far, from my perspective. And I had just assumed that he would not want to be involved in it at all. And so I never invited him to be a part of it. Now, if I had invited him to be a part of it and he had said, "No, that's fine. I'm not going to force anybody to take part in that." But I was missing out on spending time with my son. I was missing out on making memories, as horrible as that might sound. But I was missing out on connection with him because I'd failed to invite him to be a part of it. And so even in those areas where it's not their responsibility, it's something that you wanted to do, it's not their chores, invite them to be a part. Give them the opportunity to say no, but invite them to be a part of it. I think through that, they also have an opportunity to learn responsibility. Folks, many of these lessons are lessons that I have learned the hard way, and I don't claim to have it all figured out. But I do strongly believe that the earlier you start giving your kids responsibility, I think it really teaches them some great life lessons. Make sure that the responsibilities that you give to kids are appropriate for their age and the maturity level. Hold them accountable for their areas of responsibility, but as safely as you can, allow them to fail. Don't make them do your chores, but invite them to take part. I think all of those things can be very, very helpful in teaching your kids responsibility. If there's something that I've missed, something you disagree with, as always, reach out to me, brian@thehomesteadjourney.net. You can also reach out to me on all of our social media accounts. Next week, the plan is to have Brian Jr. actually on the podcast. Hopefully we'll be able to squeeze it in. It is a busy week here, so I may have to pivot and bring him on the week after. But the plan is hopefully to have him on the podcast next week as we talk about his perspective of the pluses and minuses of growing up on a homestead. Until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.